So another part of the body that's important for maintaining homeostasis is the excretory system. And the main functions of the excretory system are the elimination of waste products, regulation of water balance, electrolytes, acids, bases, blood pressure, and the activation of vitamin D production. Okay, so these are all parts of the urinary system, which is part of the excretory system. When we're talking about the excretory system, we're focused on urinary system, not thinking about the digestive system that you did last year. Okay, and so the main components of the urinary system are the kidneys. Okay, the ureters feed from the kidneys into the bladder, and then the bladder drains out of the urethra, which is like the outside world, to get the urine into the toilet, I guess, behind a tree. The different parts of the kidney. Okay, I'm going to switch over. Different parts of the kidney. You have the outer part, which is the renal cortex. Then you have the medulla, and then you have the pelvis. Okay, and now when we click on that, it's just going to tell me that. Okay. Okay, now we're going to zoom in and to look at the functional units of the kidney, which are called nephrons. And each kidney is made up of many nephrons. So here's a nephron right here. Okay, and so the red are the blood vessels. Okay, and those are capillaries. And if you remember, capillaries are the smallest of the blood vessels. They're about one red blood cell wide. Okay, so it's they're very small. Okay, they form this kind of mesh, and then we have the renal tubule, which is this kind of beige color. Okay, and you see it's kind of all swiggled around, and it's kind of wrapped around the capillary. Okay, and so the purpose is that components of the blood, waste products, and even some useful stuff from the blood is through the process of diffusing into the renal tubule. Okay, and we have what we have right here. So this is called Bowman's capsule, this part right here, and the glomerulus. Okay, Bowman's capsule then becomes the proximal tubule, or proximal convoluted tubule, which is this kind of like wrappy, windy part. Then we have what's called the loop of Henle. This is the descending loop of Henle. This is the ascending loop of Henle. Then we have the distal tubule, and then finally we have the collecting duct. Okay, and then this goes out of the kidney, and then eventually drains into the bladder. Okay, and you see, you have a whole bunch of these nephrons in each of the two kidneys that we have. And if you remember, kidneys, they're about the size of your fist, and they're at the back, kind of like your back and kind of like near where your waist is. All right, so what's going on when we go and zoom in further? Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is follow water. Okay, so water we know is really important for maintaining homeostasis, and there's a couple of things that water does, right? So we need water in order to maintain the proper electrolyte balance. So that's like dissolve things in water, like sodium chloride and other ions. And that electrolyte balance means that the cells, compared to the blood, maintain kind of like a homeostatic equilibrium. Okay, with the amount of water. We don't want too much water. We don't want too little water. Now, let's say it's like cold out today. So when it's cold, your blood pressure is higher because your blood vessels constrict. Okay, and so because you have a higher blood pressure, you want to maintain, you don't want to have that high blood pressure. One way that we reduce blood pressure is we release some of the water that's in the blood out through the urine. And then that will mean the whole volume of water in the body is lower. And so there's less pressure in our blood vessels. And so the nephrons and kidneys can help do that. Okay, so let's follow water first. So it's going to show a little water molecule as it's moving from, so you can see this is in the capillary, then it goes into Bowman's capsule. The glomerulus is, when I talk about the glomerulus, it's focused on this kind of this part of the capillary bed right here, like where this kind of mesh is. All right, so the water molecule, it gets passed into the renal tubule. Then some of it gets reabsorbed back in the blood because we want to maintain the proper amount of water in the blood. We don't want to lose too much water in our urine. And so that's why it's reabsorbed. It's reabsorbed also in the collecting duct at the end. Okay. Now, urea is the waste product. So when amino acids are being broke down, they get turned into urea, which is sort of a less harmful nitrogen-based waste product. And so when we want to get rid of urea, it just passes out directly from the blood into the collecting duct, and it's not reabsorbed. We don't want any urea. Okay, it's not useful. It's a waste product. So we want to get rid of it. Glucose. Well, actually, let's switch over to protein. So proteins, are really big. Okay, and so proteins will not pass through into the urine. Okay, we don't want to lose protein that way. If there is protein in your blood, that means there's something wrong. You have kidney damage of some sort, and I'll talk more about that when we get to kidney diseases later. Okay, so watch, as a protein, it stays in the blood. Okay, so we definitely don't want it to pass out. Glucose. Okay, likewise, glucose is small enough, it can pass into the blood. We don't want, or out of the, it can pass out of the blood into the renal tubule, but we want to reabsorb glucose. Glucose is an important molecule we need for energy, so we don't want to lose it. Now, again, you can have glucose in your urine, but that also can signify something's wrong. So let's say you're diabetic. Okay, you might have an excessive amount of glucose in your urine, and that's usually a sign. This is why blood tests are really useful for determining these things. And then finally, sodium. Sodium is another useful molecule because it maintains a proper osmotic balance. So it passes in the renal tubule, but it also gets reabsorbed back into the blood. Okay, and the reason is you have too much sodium in the renal tubule, then you'll lose more water to maintain osmotic balance, and so then you'll be excreting too much water. Okay, so that's why it's reabsorbed. Now it gets really complicated down in here, and there's active and passive transport that are occurring. You don't need to know that kind of detail for this year, but the textbook sections that I had you read on Monday explain all of those things. But just so you know, you don't actually have to know that detail. Here is just showing a close-up version of what's happening in the Bowman's capsule between the capillaries and the renal tubule, and as you can see, the protein is not absorbed, but all the other molecules are because they're small enough. Okay, now we're in the proximal tubule. You can see that water, glucose, and sodium are all reabsorbed in the proximal tubule. Then when we go to the loop of Henle, you can see that water is reabsorbed. Okay, and you're going to see sodium being reabsorbed there on the ascending loop of Henle. So it's the ascending because the fluid is moving up. Okay, and we call the fluid in this tubule, it's called filtrate. Okay, and then the outside, the blood vessels are right beside. The capillary is still beside. Okay, and then finally the distal tubule. Oh, nothing really happening there, but let's go to the collecting duct. So here's a collecting duct. Okay, normally water's not reabsorbed here. Now, there's a hormone called antidiuretic hormone. So let's say your blood pressure is really low, your body doesn't have enough water, then this hormone will be secreted by the pituitary to cause you to reabsorb water. Okay, so see now the membrane of the tubule is permeable to water, and the water is reabsorbed back into the blood. Okay, and so that's it for this animation. I'm going to add this to Monday's. Well, actually, I'll put it on for today, but it has more information on it. Kind of just talks a little bit about filtration. So filtration again is the formation of urine. Okay, and what's being reabsorbed. Okay, all these things are important. Nitrogenous wastes are not reabsorbed, and if you have too much water, it's not reabsorbed. And you can see this when you go to the bathroom. Like if you've drank a lot of water that day, you'll see that your urine is lighter. If you haven't had enough, then you'll see your urine is darker. Okay, so a lot can be told by the color of your urine as well. Okay, and then here it just gives you a little bit more detail on what that animation was showing. You can see a diagram showing all of that kind of stuff. Again, you don't need to know what's active transport and what's passive transport. Just know that molecules are diffusing in and out. Okay. And then the last bit is kidney diseases, and I'll post this note too. So we have diabetes mellitus. Okay, so diabetes mellitus is a type of diabetes when you have a too high blood sugar, okay, because you're not secreting enough insulin. And so what happens is the way you would notice this is that in your urine output or in the filtrate, there'd be a higher percentage of glucose, okay, than what would be in the blood or what would be normal. Diabetes insipidus it's not diabetes as you traditionally think of diabetes being, blood sugar, but diabetes insipidus is when I said before it was the pituitary, it's the hypothalamus that secretes the antidiuretic hormone. Okay, so if they're damaged, then it's not secreted, and so then you're going to have an increased urine output throughout the day. Okay, so that would be, I guess, your sign for like that you have that disease. And bright disease is when you have an inflammation of the kidney and the nephron. And so what that means is it's damaged. The blood vessels get damaged, so they're more permeable and they release larger molecules. And so you would have protein in your actual urine output. Okay, so you'd have if you're excreting protein in your urine, then that's a sign that you have Bright's disease. And Bright's disease is kind of like Crohn's disease. It talks about all different ways that the kidney can be inflamed. Usually infection would be the cause. So like bacteria breaking down. And then kidney stones, probably the one that most people are familiar with. So some of the ions can precipitate and form mineral solids inside the renal pelvis and then in the ureter, and so they form little stones and they get stuck, and then passing a stone can be really painful. And one way that they use to decrease the size of the stones, that you can use ultrasound to sort of blast the stones. So I want you to try this, and I'll post the answers later in the week. But this table has what the plasma components, and if you remember, plasma is, when I'm talking about plasma, it's blood. So when you think of your blood system, the red blood cells carry the oxygen, okay? But the red blood cells are themselves being carried in the plasma that's flowing through the blood vessels. So when we talk about the blood and how it carries all these things, we're talking about not just red blood cells, we're talking about all the components of the blood. So the plasma, the platelets, the red blood cells, and the white blood cells. But the plasma is kind of like the river that carries all of these things. Red blood cells are kind of like a boat that carries oxygen. And so all the molecules, the important biochemical molecules in our cells and in our bodies, they're all dissolved in the plasma. So here you see the normal amounts, and these are concentrations. It doesn't have units. I don't care about the units. You're more looking at the comparison of the numbers. So you see urea 0.03. You don't want to see urea change because urea is a waste byproduct. So the plasma level of that, if it's higher, then that means there's something wrong. Uric acid is also a waste byproduct of nitrogen, but then you have your useful molecules, glucose, amino acids, and proteins. You're going to want to see, so these levels indicate if there's a higher or a lower level in the blood versus the urine. It can indicate certain issues. So based on these descriptions of these diseases, which patient here might have diabetes mellitus? Give your reasons. Which patient might have a failure in the glomerulus? Give your reasons. And which one might have just eaten a protein-rich meal? Give your reasons. Okay. And then, like I said, we'll take that up tomorrow. So that concludes the homeostasis unit. I will move on to population dynamics. And if we're back in school at some point, then I plan on going back to the unit we were supposed to start, because the genetics unit and the metabolism units are probably better. They're better kind of like live units, just because there's a lot of information. Okay, hopefully this is helpful. Thanks.